stands at a terrifying crossroads as the shadow of a total regional conflict looms larger than ever before. Intelligence communities from Washington to Tel Aviv have confirmed what many thought impossible, a seismic shift in the Middle Eastern landscape that has left the Islamic Republic of Iran reeling. This is not merely another chapter in a long-standing rivalry. It is the definitive shattering of a status quo that has defined global geopolitics for more than 40 years. The breaking news has sent ripples of shock and awe across the globe. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader and the ultimate arbiter of power within the Iranian state, is dead. Israeli intelligence sources have not only confirmed his demise, but have reportedly shared photographic evidence of his passing, marking a symbolic and literal end to an era of defiance. The strikes that targeted the very heart of the leadership in Tehran were precise, brutal, and calculated to decapitate the regime command structure in one swift motion. As the smoke rises from the ruins of high-security compounds, the world is forced to confront a major new obstacle that has emerged in the path of regional stability. This obstacle is the sudden and violent void at the apex of the Iranian government, a vacancy that threatens to plunge the nation and its numerous proxy forces into a state of uncontrollable chaos. In Washington, the atmosphere is one of intense focus and strategic calculation. President Donald Trump, speaking from the heart of American power, has characterized this moment as a historic turning point. He has made a direct and emotional appeal to the Iranian people, telling them that the hour of their freedom is finally at hand. His message was both a promise of a new beginning and a stern warning of the dangers currently raining down from the sky. He urged the citizens of Iran to stay sheltered and avoid the streets, as the campaign of carpet bombing continues to systematically dismantle the infrastructure of the Islamic Republic. This operation, described as ongoing and relentless, aims to ensure that the regime can never again pose a threat to its neighbors or its own people. However, the question remains whether this is the liberation that was promised or the beginning of a much darker period of instability. The streets of Tehran, once bustling with life and the enforcement of strict religious codes, are now filled with the sound of air raid sirens and the thunder of explosions. The invincibility of the supreme leader was the foundation upon which the entire state was built, and with that foundation gone, the walls are beginning to crumble. Geopolitical analysts are now pointing to this leadership vacuum as the most significant hurdle to any peaceful transition. Without a clear successor, and with the Revolutionary Guard in a state of high alert and potential fragmentation, the risk of a multifaceted civil war is growing by the hour. The major new obstacle is not just the physical destruction of military assets, but the psychological collapse of a nation that has been told for 40 years that it was the vanguard of a global movement. This is a moment of extreme peril where every decision made by international actors could either lead to a fragile peace or a conflagration that consumes the entire Middle East. The world is watching, waiting to see if this is truly the end of a long and bitter era, or if the obstacle currently facing Iran will lead to an even more dangerous and unpredictable future. The stakes have never been higher, and the path forward is shrouded in the dust and debris of a fallen regime. As the smoke clears over the decimated remains of the Iranian command centers, a major new obstacle has emerged that threatens to end the existence of the Islamic Republic as we know it. Intelligence agencies have confirmed that the decapitation of the leadership was not just a loss of a single man, but the total destruction of the encrypted communications network that held the nation together. For Iran, this is an insurmountable hurdle. Without a central voice to command the sprawling and complex network of the Revolutionary Guard, the once unified military machine is beginning to fracture into competing factions. This internal disintegration is the major new obstacle that makes the current situation far more dangerous than any previous crisis the regime has faced. For the first time in 40 years, the iron grip of the central government has been broken, and the resulting chaos is a vacuum that no one seems able to fill. This is the end of the cohesion that allowed Iran to project power across the Middle East. The loss of the supreme leader was the catalyst, but the obstacle is the permanent damage to the state infrastructure that functioned as the nervous system of the revolution. The desperation in Tehran is palpable as the carpet bombing campaign systematically targets the energy and transportation sectors. This physical isolation is a major new obstacle for the regime as it attempts to organize a defense. With the power grid down and bridges destroyed, the movement of troops and supplies has ground to a halt. While the United States and Israel continue their aerial assault, the Iranian military finds itself blinded and immobilized. The intelligence confirming this obstacle highlights that the regime failed to prepare for a scenario where their internal lines of communication were severed so completely. This lack of a backup plan has left thousands of soldiers in the field without orders, waiting in silence for a leader who will never return. President Trump has noted this paralysis, suggesting that the regime is essentially a house of cards that has finally been blown over by the winds of change. However, the end of the regime does not necessarily mean the beginning of peace. The obstacle for the people of Iran is the sudden absence of any governing authority, leading to a state of lawlessness where survival becomes the only priority. Furthermore, the international community is struggling to respond to a major new obstacle in the form of a looming humanitarian catastrophe. Reports of a strike on a girls' school in the city of Minab have sparked outrage, and while the United States denies intentionality, the loss of dozens of young lives has become a rallying cry for those still loyal to the old guard. This tragedy serves as a major new obstacle to the American narrative of a bloodless liberation. As the death toll rises and the infrastructure of daily life vanishes, the prospect of a smooth transition to democracy seems increasingly remote. The world is witnessing the systematic dismantling of a modern state, and the obstacle for the regional neighbors is the massive wave of refugees already beginning to gather at the borders. In Riyadh and Kuwait, the closure of American embassies signals a retreat into defensive postures as the entire region braces for the fallout of the collapse in Tehran. Whether this truly marks the end of the Islamic Republic remains to be seen, but the obstacles currently facing the nation are so immense that a return to the status quo is now impossible. The world must now prepare for the unpredictable consequences of a nation pushed beyond its breaking point. Beyond the immediate physical devastation of the airstrikes, a major new obstacle has surfaced in the form of an absolute financial and logistical paralysis that is suffocating what remains of the Iranian state. Intelligence reports confirm that the sophisticated shadow economy, which the regime spent over 40 years building to bypass international sanctions, has effectively evaporated overnight. This network of front companies and illicit banking channels relied entirely on the personal authority and secret codes held by a select few individuals within the inner circle of the supreme leader. With those leaders dead or in hiding, the keys to the kingdom have been lost. This is the major new obstacle that no one predicted: the sudden and total bankruptcy of a revolutionary movement that still has millions of mouths to feed and a massive military to maintain. Experts in geopolitical economics suggest that without access to these hidden funds, the Iranian government cannot pay its civil servants, its soldiers, or its internal security forces. We are looking at a scenario where the very men tasked with defending the regime may soon find themselves unable to buy bread for their families. This financial decapitation is perhaps more lethal than the bombs falling on Tehran, as it turns the state into a hollow shell from within. Is this truly the end? When the currency becomes worthless and the government has no way to distribute resources, the social contract between the rulers and the ruled is not just broken, it is incinerated. This major new obstacle is further complicated by the reaction of Iran's remaining allies. While the world watches the destruction, traditional partners like Russia and China are facing a strategic nightmare. The intelligence confirms that these powers are hesitant to intervene, fearing that the collapse is too far gone to be reversed. For Russia, the loss of a key military partner in the Middle East is a significant blow, but the obstacle for Moscow is the risk of being dragged into a direct confrontation with a resurgent and aggressive American administration. China, on the other hand, is concerned with the total disruption of its energy security. The major new obstacle for Beijing is the prospect of a long-term instability that shuts down the flow of oil through the Persian Gulf for months or even years. This international hesitation has left Iran completely isolated, a pariah state that has lost its shield and its sword at the same time. The internal struggle for power is also intensifying, as different branches of the military and the intelligence services begin to turn on one another in a desperate bid for survival. Reports are emerging of skirmishes between the regular army and the Revolutionary Guard in the suburbs of Tehran, as the army attempts to seize control of food warehouses and fuel depots. This internal civil friction is a major new obstacle to any organized resistance against the foreign airstrikes. The narrative of the revolution is also facing its end. For decades, the regime maintained its grip through a combination of religious fervor and the promise of resistance against the West. However, with the supreme leader gone and the country in ruins, that ideology is failing to provide answers to the immediate misery of the population. The major new obstacle for the remaining hardliners is that they are no longer fighting for a cause, they are fighting for a ghost. As the carpet bombing continues to target the command and control centers, the psychological impact of seeing the once untouchable icons of the state reduced to rubble is profound. The people of Iran are trapped between the terror of the falling bombs and the fear of what comes next. The intelligence confirms that the obstacle to a new government is the lack of any organized opposition that can step in to fill the void. Without a clear alternative, the end of the Islamic Republic could mean years of warlordism and regional fragmentation. This is the dark reality of the major new obstacle. A collapse so total that there is nothing left to build upon. The world is witnessing the death of a state in real time, and the obstacles to its rebirth are growing more complex with every passing hour. The intelligence reports reaching the highest levels of the Pentagon have now confirmed the existence of a major new obstacle that could fundamentally alter the course of this conflict and potentially signal the end of Iran as a unified state. This obstacle is the sudden and catastrophic activation of a defensive protocol known as the Scorched Earth Digital Initiative. Developed over the last decade to prevent a foreign takeover of the nation's critical infrastructure, this system was designed to be triggered only by the direct command of the supreme leader or in the event of his confirmed death. Now that the death of Ayatollah Khamenei has been verified, the system has autonomously locked down the entire national information network, effectively severing Iran from the global internet and, more importantly, from its own internal controls. This is the major new obstacle that has left the remaining Iranian leadership in a state of total technological paralysis. Every power plant, every water treatment facility, and every automated missile defense battery is now operating on a pre-programmed loop with no way for human operators to intervene. This digital suicide is creating a scenario where the country is essentially consuming itself from the inside out. The intelligence suggests that without the unique biometric keys held only by the late Ayatollah, these systems will continue to shut down, one by one, leaving the population without basic services, and the military without its eyes and ears. This is not just a tactical setback. It is a major new obstacle to the very survival of the Iranian people. The chaos within the command structure has reached a breaking point as various factions of the Revolutionary Guard realize they are locked out of their own arsenals. This major new obstacle has turned the once formidable Iranian military into a collection of isolated units, each acting without coordination or a clear objective. Reports from the ground indicate that commanders in the field are frantically trying to bypass these security protocols, but the encryption is so advanced that it may take years to crack. Meanwhile, the American and Israeli forces are taking full advantage of this blindness. The carpet bombing campaign has transitioned from targeting leadership to neutralizing the now stationary and vulnerable missile sites. This is the major new obstacle that the regime never truly prepared for, the possibility that their own defensive measures would become their ultimate prison. The question of whether this is the end is no longer a matter of if, but when. As the central government evaporates, the major new obstacle for the international community is the risk of these automated systems malfunctioning and triggering a larger environmental or nuclear disaster. The world is looking at a rogue state where the machines are still following the orders of a dead man. This is a terrifying development in modern warfare, where the major new obstacle is a ghost in the machine that cannot be reasoned with or defeated through conventional means. The humanitarian implications are staggering, as millions of people are now trapped in a country that is effectively shutting down its own life support systems. As the sun sets over a darkening Tehran, the reality of this major new obstacle is sinking in. There is no one left to turn the lights back on, and the end of the Islamic Republic is being written in the cold, unyielding logic of a computer code that has no master. As we enter the fourth day of this relentless conflict, the Middle East is not just burning, it is being fundamentally reshaped by fire and steel. Intelligence confirmed that the initial optimism of a swift, surgical strike has been replaced by the grim reality of a total war with no clear exit strategy. This is the major new obstacle that now haunts the halls of the White House and the bunkers of Tel Aviv. While the airstrikes have successfully dismantled the primary command structures, the expected internal uprising has not yet manifested in the organized way many had predicted. Instead of a unified movement toward democracy, the vacuum has invited a chaotic scramble for power among dozens of local militias and splinter groups. This fragmentation is a major new obstacle because it makes the task of stabilization nearly impossible. There is no single group to negotiate with, no clear leader to support, and no central authority to restore order. The question of whether this is the end of the war or merely the beginning of a much longer and more painful occupation is now being asked with increasing urgency. Critics are beginning to wonder if the United States has traded a predictable enemy for an unpredictable and multi-headed insurgency. The human cost of this strategic gamble is becoming tragically clear. Intelligence confirms that the carpet bombing of Tehran has led to a visceral and desperate situation for the civilian population. Reports from the southern city of Minab regarding the strike on a girls' school have added a layer of profound moral complexity to the operation. While the American military maintains that it never targets civilians, the destruction of such a facility serves as a major new obstacle to winning the hearts and minds of the Iranian people. This tragedy is being used by remnants of the regime to fuel a new wave of anti-American sentiment, complicating President Trump's message of liberation. He has told the people of Iran that the hour of their freedom is at hand, but for many on the ground, that freedom is arriving in the form of falling debris and shattered lives. The major new obstacle here is the growing perception that this is not a liberation, but a conquest. This shift in sentiment is the end of the honeymoon period for any potential transitional government. If the local population views the liberators as aggressors, the path to a stable pro-Western Iran is effectively blocked. Furthermore, the conflict is no longer confined to Iranian borders, as the major new obstacle of regional escalation has become a terrifying reality. In retaliation for the strikes on Tehran, missiles have been seen raining down on Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem. The Gulf states are also feeling the heat, with United States missions in Riyadh and Kuwait coming under direct attack. The closure of these embassies and the urgent call for American nationals to flee the region underscore the severity of this major new obstacle. The entire Middle East is now a front line. The intelligence suggests that Iranian proxy forces, despite losing their central coordination, are acting on standing orders to strike Western interests wherever possible. This decentralized retaliation is much harder to defend against than a concentrated military force. The world is watching to see if this was indeed a masterstroke by Donald Trump or the biggest mistake of his career. Was the calculation wrong? Did the administration believe this would be a quick collapse like Venezuela, only to find themselves stuck in a quagmire reminiscent of Afghanistan? This uncertainty is the major new obstacle that defines this hour. As the bombs continue to drop and the casualties mount, the promise of a new era is being tested by the ancient, stubborn realities of regional warfare. The end of the regime may be certain, but the end of the violence is nowhere in sight. The geopolitical landscape of the Middle East has been irrevocably altered, and as the dust settles over the ruins of Tehran, the world is forced to confront the final and most daunting major new obstacle of this entire conflict. This obstacle is the sheer complexity of building a new order in a land that has been defined by resistance and revolutionary ideology for nearly half a century. Intelligence confirms that while the physical structures of the regime have been dismantled and the leadership eliminated, the deep state and its sprawling bureaucracy remain hidden in the shadows. This is the major new obstacle for any transitional authority. There are hundreds of thousands of individuals whose livelihoods and identities were tied to the old system, and their sudden displacement creates a massive pool of potential insurgents. We are seeing the beginning of a major new obstacle that could mirror the most difficult years of previous regional conflicts, where the end of the formal war only marked the start of a much more brutal and decentralized struggle. The question of whether this is the end is met with a sobering reality that the end of one regime is often the birth of 1,000 new complications. The global economy is also grappling with a major new obstacle as the reality of a post-revolutionary Iran begins to set in. The total collapse of the Iranian oil industry has sent shockwaves through the energy markets, and while the United States has promised to increase production, the immediate shortfall is causing significant pain for developing nations. This economic instability is a major new obstacle to global cooperation, as nations once aligned with the Western strategy are now facing domestic unrest due to rising costs. Intelligence reports suggest that the vacuum left by Iranian oil is being filled by aggressive moves from other regional powers, creating a new set of tensions within the global trade network. This is the end of the previous energy security model, and the major new obstacle is the lack of a clear successor to the old system of regional balances. As countries scramble to secure their own interests, the risk of a new trade war or a series of localized resource conflicts is growing by the day. This is the major new obstacle that could define the next decade of international relations. On the ground in Iran, the major new obstacle to a peaceful future is the profound psychological and social trauma inflicted by the intensity of the air campaign. Intelligence confirms that the scars left by the carpet bombing and the tragic civilian losses, such as the event in Minab, have created a legacy of bitterness that will take generations to heal. This is the major new obstacle for the American narrative of liberation. President Trump's vision of a free and democratic Iran is now facing the harsh reality of a population that is mourning its dead and struggling to find clean water and food. The hour of freedom has arrived, but it is accompanied by the heavy burden of reconstruction and reconciliation. This is the end of the Islamic Republic, but the birth of a new Iran is being stifled by the weight of its own ruins. The major new obstacle is the lack of a local leadership that can bridge the gap between the aspirations of the youth and the traditions of the older generation. Without a domestic face to lead the recovery, the foreign presence will continue to be viewed with suspicion and hostility. In conclusion, the major new obstacle is the realization that military power, no matter how overwhelming, cannot instantly create a stable society. The intelligence confirms that the end of the regime was achieved with terrifying efficiency, but the end of the crisis is nowhere in sight. The world is watching a nation at its lowest point, facing obstacles that seem insurmountable. This is the end of an era of defiance, but the beginning of a period of deep uncertainty. The major new obstacle is the challenge of turning a military victory into a lasting peace. As the last of the strategic bombers return to their bases, the real work begins in the corridors of diplomacy and the rubble of the streets. The story of Iran is not over. It has merely entered a new and much more dangerous chapter, where the obstacles are no longer found on a map, but in the hearts and minds of a broken people. The final question remains: was the masterstroke worth the cost, or have we simply cleared the way for an even greater storm?